Hi, welcome to this. First, welcome to 2026, and let's welcome to this special edition of the Fine Print. Bruce thought it was important that there's a lot of noise out there, and it's a lot of good comments as well. Commentary about how the year opened. It certainly opened with a bang, um, and I think that there are a lot of legal constitutional issues that need to be addressed. I'm 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 uh, I'm sick, so I'm going to mute myself for a good part of this conversation. But I wanted to at least get myself up out of bed to spend this hour or so with Bruce, and then I'll get back to bed. Excuse me. So I want to set it up in just a couple of quick ways, and then turn it over to Bruce. Uh, I think obviously, at least it's obvious to me, if we look at I built a table here that I put up. I haven't put it up here. I just put it up on my iPad so I wouldn't forget. Um, let's look at the Venezuela justification. Maduro was an illegitimate leader. U.S. indictments for narco terrorism. A military action went to Venezuela to arrest a criminal. The country will be administered by the U.S. during this transition. We don't really know what that means. Uh, it seems that we might seize the oil assets, supposedly to stabilize the country, supposedly for our mutual interest. Um, but and this is being justified as a law enforcement and not an act of war. And I guess the reference point that could be made is to the action we took against Noriega in Panama as the legal foundation for doing this as a law enforcement action, and also for the precedent to establish on who's a legitimate leader and who isn't a legitimate leader, and who gets to decide that. Now I want to do a side by side comparison. Okay, China says the Taiwan government is illegitimate, and China probably has a better claim to the illegitimacy of Taiwan than the U.S. has towards um, Maduro and Venezuela, because while many people have challenged the outcome of the Venezuelan election, okay, basically they've been recognized by the UN. Countries negotiate with them, so for all intents and purposes, people have treated Maduro as a legitimately elected president, even while they question the illegitimacy of the electoral count. But the electoral count is deemed illegitimate in a lot of countries. Um, so China could also indict Taiwanese leaders for separatism, sedition, and terrorism. Few countries, Taiwan is not in the UN, and few countries have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So that's why I say the case could be Taiwan is deemed even, a better case for the illegitimacy of Taiwan and the leaders there than Maduro in Venezuela. So basically, if Mr. Xi wanted to deploy the Trump doctrine, uh, he could go in the military action to arrest criminals who in Taiwan are leading an insurgency. Uh, that he could go in, Mr. Xi can go in and administer Taiwan during some sort of reunification transition, because most countries have accepted the China One policy. In addition, he could seize the semiconductor industry to stabilize Taiwan, and he can justify it as just an internal security operation, not a war. So, if we wanted to apply the Trump doctrine as a philosophical principle, that can be a step, but that can be claimed by anyone, not just Trump, unless its adoption just unique to him. But he basically this is being claimed as a legal doctrine, so it's a legal doctrine. It's a principle, and if it's a principle, the principle is for general application, under specific circumstances. And we could think about how many other countries could make claims. I'm just going to make one more example, but before turning this over to Trump, to Bruce. Excuse me. Um, Basically, Trump could have also used the same argument uh, against Biden in 2020. He could have said, Biden's not legitimately elected. I'm still the president. A matter of fact, with the Trump immunity decision, Trump could have gone out and just assassinated Biden. Biden as leading an insurrection against the country, determining that he was really an illegitimate leader. So, I think this is, so the question is I think it's an important question, and who gets to determine uh, legitimacy? And I think I'll make just one more point. I think this is also why, the Constitution, was designed in a way that no one person should be able to make this decision by themselves without consultation with Congress. So the founders wanted to make sure that the president, didn't have this power. And how important they felt about it is the founders, when they were drafting the Constitution, I think it was basically everybody at the convention was pretty sure that George Washington would be, the first president, and George Washington would be the first president not just because he was a general that led us to victory in the American Revolution, but he's the one, like an example is like Cincinnatus, who decided after victory, to go home and back to his, being his plantation to be a farmer, and so what was admired about Washington, maybe even more so than the one that led us in revolution, was his public virtue. So his public virtue was considered beyond reproach, and so even knowing that he was going to be, the first president, the first leader, they still and they knew, they were confident that they would have that it would be the elected president, as he was elected twice with 100% of the electoral vote. So basically unanimously, it was as much for his public civic virtue as it was for him being the general that led us to victory over the British. So from there, hopefully, if Bruce has any problems with the way I've set this up, of course he's free to comment now. So I'm going to mute myself, Bruce, and turn this over to you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. Yes, I do think Saturday was kind of a milestone, if you will, although it should not be taken in isolation in terms of its complete attack on constitutional regularity, on creating precedents that will lie around like a loaded weapon, ready to be used to invade any country at any time in any place based upon bogus arguments. And if this doesn't lead to the impeachment and removal of Mr. Trump by the Congress of the United States, I think the Republic then is dead. We're off permanently of life support. And let me provide a little bit of background to understand the invasion yesterday of Venezuela by the United States military. We weren't being attacked. This was not an invasion in self-defense. But it came on the heels of ongoing murders in the Caribbean and in Eastern Pacific of suspected drug traffickers who are not outside the law. There were, I think, were well over 100 at this time. Thievery of oil that belongs to Venezuela, blockading Venezuela oil tankers. And Mr. Trump on Saturday also said that if a single Iranian protester against the Supreme Leader Khamenei in Iran is killed, then we're locked and ready to attack Iran. Basically, these are assertions by the President of the United States that I will go anytime, any place, anywhere I feel like with the United States Armed Forces and kill you, capture you, kidnap you, irrespective of the law. Now that is about as Napoleonic as you can get. Maybe it's not an accident that Mr. Trump prides himself on quoting Napoleon. If you're saving the country, you can't do anything illegal. Now, all of these actions that Mr. Trump has taken has been without any authority from Congress, even though the Constitution is explicit. All war powers belong in the Congress of the United States, 100% of war powers. Now, of course, the president can act unilaterally in self-defense when in fact attacked. Venezuela, notwithstanding Mr. Trump, was not invading the United States. It was not attacking the United States. It have an inability to attack the United States. And when Mr. Trump has gone into court and tried to convince judges that, oh, we're being invaded by Venezuela forces, they've been unsuccessful because it's a figment of Mr. Trump's imagination. So these are clear efforts by Mr. Trump in usurpation of the national security war powers of the Congress of the United States. And I have no doubt that if Mr. Trump had proposed to Congress to be given authority to do what he has done, Congress would vote it down. No one believes, for instance, that if you prosecute Mr. Maduro in U.S. courts for drug trafficking, that it's going to make any dent in drug trafficking. Indeed, how can it be said with a straight face that Mr. Trump is worried about drug trafficking into the United States when this last week he pardoned the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been convicted of smuggling in 400 tons of cocaine in order, in his own words, to stuff the drugs up the nose of the gringos. That's the words of someone who received a pardon. For Mr. Trump, he had been serving 45 years in federal prison after conviction of a trial in New York City. You really expect us to believe, Mr. Trump, you're concerned about drug trafficking when you give a pardon to such everything short of Pablo Escobar of Colombian infamy?
Yeah, Bruce, I'd like to just interject with a question here. If that is the criteria, hasn't most of the fentanyl been attributed precursors and from coming from China that are then shipped to Mexico and then come from Mexico? And basically, previously, Trump had said China's participation in the fentanyl crisis, he has declared as an act of war. So if you apply the Trump doctrine, he believes he has the power, if he chooses, to now go into China and extract Mr. Xi and put Mr. Xi on trial here, since there's already been a number of statements that China's participation in the fentanyl market, has been extensive, and probably partnering with Mexico, the most expensive contributor to fentanyl and the deaths related to fentanyl. So if our priority is to stop the prevention of drugs coming into this country, why Venezuela, and why not the partnership of China and Mexico?
Well, what you omitted, Jeffrey, I believe, is not only would we go in and kidnap Mr. Z for prosecution, then we would have a triumvirate. The Secretary of State and Secretary of War would then stay and annex China and rule China indefinitely until James Madison or Thomas Jefferson or George Washington appeared on the Yangtze River, which could be like 1,000 years. I mean, really?
They can take over the AI, or all the AI technology that China has.
Yeah, electric batteries.
And get the TikTok algorithm.
Yeah. And remember also, according to Mr. Trump, all of Venezuelan oil has been stolen from the United States, right? Even though the oil is in Venezuela, they stole it from us because they should have understood that God gave us as chosen people all the resources of the galaxy, and everybody except Americans are squatters on American soil and American resources. So it's an absurd claim. It would be like how about the Native American Indians then going after all the oil in the United States and say, you stole it from us. We were here before you, and therefore it belongs to us. So it completely destroys the idea of ownership. And moreover, when you think about that, Jeffrey, if we compare, and there was nationalization, which many countries do, of oil companies, Americans, there were arbitration, and there were sums that have been awarded to companies whose oil was taken as nationalization, just like Iranian British oil company was taken by Mossadegh in Iran, and he negotiated for a price to be paid for it. countries all the time nationalize businesses for national security purposes, but you got to have a fair price paid. But compare, for example, Aramco. Aramco, all U.S. oil companies in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia took it over entirely, completely. Has Trump said, oh, all of Saudi oil belongs to the United States because you took it from Aramco? Aramco did the drilling. Without Aramco's technology, the Saudis probably still wouldn't be pumping a barrel of oil a day. No, he doesn't, because he likes Saudi Arabians. They have their sovereign wealth fund that enriches his family. So he looks the other way. So what this shows, I believe, is we don't have Mr. Trump acting on any principle at all other than, I did it because I feel I could get away with it. And maybe it will be popular for a day or two. But let's go also, Jeffrey, to the idea that this was really intended to somehow curtail drug trafficking. Why, if that's what this is about, and you're shutting down Maduro, why are you running the country for the indefinite period? You've annexed the country, and why are you talking about taking over the oil? And the oil is going to pay for all of our occupation costs. You remember we heard that about Iraq too, 2003. George W. Oh, oil will pay for every penny. You know how much money we've spent in Iraq since then? $3 trillion, right? With a little bit, that's more than a rounding error on estimating what the cost of our occupation of Iraq was. $3 trillion. So we know this is just a made up number, made up, to make it soothing for in the short term. Moreover, how is Mr. Hegseth and Mr. Rubio going to run Venezuela? To show, I believe, how unorganized and amateurish this was. Yesterday, Mr. Trump announced that he had spoken to the vice president of Venezuela, appointed or selected by Maduro, and she agreed that, hey, so happy that the Americans had attacked, and she would work with the United States in putting together a new government. Well, that was a big lie. She went public and said, are you kidding me? This is a crime. This is illegal. I'm not tolerating any of this that's been done. And yet they brazenly said she had already been co-opted. In any event, I think this shows that this was not about Maduro.
Yeah, I think she went even further by asserting that Maduro is still a legitimate leader of Venezuela.
Yeah.
And she, to my knowledge, as of yet has not been sworn in as his successor.
Yeah.
And she has demanded his release. So they've taken no action to actually, I assume for practical reasons that she's running the country now, but from a legal perspective, I don't think she's been sworn in.
No, but it shows.
But she says that there's still that Maduro is still a legitimate leader.
Yeah, my point, Jeff, what you said is absolutely right. I was trying to make a little different point, which is the willingness of President Trump to lie through his teeth. They must have known that in advance. They just made up, oh, she was so happy to talk to us, and she'll work with us. Where'd that come from? Where's the evidence that it wasn't just made up at the 11th hour before they had a press conference? So there's virtually nothing that is said that you can believe. Totally and completely invented.
I think that's the most important point. I have said that the most destructive thing that George Bush did for the presidency is when he lied about our objectives, our goals, and the reasons for going into Iraq. I think that destroys the institution of the presidency, and at least to some extent, they told a whole bunch of lies. They convinced the UN, and they convinced Congress to support, and fund some action. This Trump made no effort to convince anyone else other than himself, So Bush deserves maybe a little more credit to at least to support it with some sort of institutional credibility, as this whole Trump administration has been an exercise of an imperial president, and he keeps reinforcing that on that he doesn't think he needs to consult Congress on anything. So yes, I think I think there was also already a basis for articles of impeachment prior to tomorrow, but Congress shows how pathetic it is that they're not speaking up and saying. I mean, the Republicans should be speaking up and saying, we support you, but you should have come to us, and we would have had your back, and we would have voted for this, and we would have been on the record voting for this, and this, and you would have acknowledged, the legitimacy of Congress, and then people would have been on the record of what they were voting for and why they were voting for it, as opposed to, as you said earlier, that he probably didn't have the votes. So if he went and did an act of war, and didn't really have the votes, think how cowardice it is that all the people know that he should have asked them and didn't, and they're going to do nothing about it.
Yeah,
How,
it is pathetic. Yeah, it is. It is a lack of backbone. It's just there aren't even words to describe how weak and anemic and irresponsible Congress has been in this whole exercise. And I also believe that another ulterior motive here was to distract attention from the Epstein files. I don't think it's an accident that it comes on the heels of these millions of pages, some including at least politically embarrassing pictures of Mr. Trump. And after there was a resounding, if you will, political defeat by Mr. Trump when Congress virtually unanimously opposed his view to try to continue to conceal the Epstein files, passed the statute. He changed, he signed it, but some of the information that's forthcoming could be politically and is politically embarrassing to the president. Here it's just another, okay, just change the attention. So the Epstein files disappear, and now the focus is on Venezuela. And then for the next years, who knows? Remember that he may be invading Iran within the next days. There's no doubt, given the massive demonstrations in Tehran and Iran against the economic privations of the crazy mullahs, it would be unlikely that not even one protester will die. If that's true, Trump's already said, locked, ready, and they're ready to bomb away. We may be in the same situation in Iran soon, because there are no limits on the recklessness, I believe, of Mr. Trump. It's complete narcissism. It's power for the sake of power. I believe that really the overriding reason for Trump doing this, aside from deflecting attention from Epstein files, was because he only gets an adrenaline high like a juvenile, to play bully on the playground. Does anybody really think, that Venezuela was a national security threat to the United States? The whole thing is a joke. It's like the Sandinistas or these little pygmy states. They couldn't threaten us at all. And we treat them like they're existential threats. So they just inflate the so-called danger in order to deflect attention from the fact that they're clueless about what they're doing, and they feel flexing their muzzles, and they'll say, see, Maduro was a bad guy, so we got rid of him. That's exactly the same words that were used by President Obama in getting rid of Gaddafi in Libya. He's a bad guy, Leon Panetta, so we got rid of him. Well, you got rid of him, and now you got terrorists there. You destroyed the entire country. It's a wilderness. It's militias killing against militias. You got mass migration across the Mediterranean. You got slavery, human trafficking. We completely destroyed the country. But we got rid of a bad guy. Maybe we ended up with a worse one. We may end up with somebody worse than Maduro. Who knows? It may be just a wilderness as well.
There's a point that, Bruce, that you've made a lot,
Yeah.
that I strongly agree with. Isn't Congress greatly responsible for not only reigning in Trump, but having not reigned in previous presidents that took these measures without proper congressional authorization, like the examples you've given now and in the past? And wouldn't you? And maybe you could say the Supreme Court has also been culpable of confusing Article 1 powers with Article 2 powers.
Yes, that's certainly true, Jeffrey. I mean, I don't know, I guess you and I were a little tiny, but the Korean War, Harry Truman fought the Korean War. He called it a police action. We were at the verge of nuclear weapons or atomic weapons against China. 3 million Chinese entered the war. Hundreds of thousands died, killed, maimed. And that was a police action. And he took it without any authorization from Congress whatsoever. And Congress did nothing. No impeachment, nothing. And since then, we have the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and then we have into Panama and Grenada and on, Iraq. Those weren't declarations of war. Even the 2003 authorization to use force. 2000 in Iraq, or AUMF after 9/11. They were just blank checks that Congress said, "Here, Mr. President, do whatever you want." No, they wouldn't declare war, because it speaks volumes, Jeffrey, that in the two instances where presidents actually have asked Congress to declare war after the Harry Truman precedent. One, Bill Clinton in 1999, he wanted a declaration of war against Serbia. Congress voted it down. And then he said, well, I'll just say it's not a war, but continue to bomb the heck out of Sarajevo and destroy Serbia. Then in 2013, President Barack Obama asked Congress to declare war against Syria, saying you use chemical weapons, President Assad. The Congress voted it down. So Obama just went to war anyway against ISIS and anything else in Syria. We still have troops in Syria today. So when Congress is required to vote on these uses of force, it will never vote in favor unless we've in fact been attacked. And we were not attacked by Serbia in 1999. We are not attacked by Syria in 2013. We were not attacked by Korea in 1950. Is Congress not going to vote for?
So isn't this evidence? Wouldn't you say that this is evidence of Madison's insight that, that if you give the president unilaterally power to engage in militarism and active war, that he's more prone to use it than in a deliberative body? And why he said that one of the most wisest aspects of the constitutional structure and design was making sure that no one person would be able to make that decision.
Exactly. So, he was a genius on that score. Jeffrey and our audience, the United States was the first and only country in the history of the world that entrusted the war power to an exclusive legislative branch and took it away completely from any executive authority. All other dispensations, including the Roman, war powers always in the executive. Of course, and one of the things that Alexander Hamilton stressed, this is Federalist 69, it says, yeah, under the British unwritten constitution, the king or queen goes to war on their own. But in the United States, that power is entrusted to the legislative body. Because the legislative body is naturally relatively slow and deliberative. It's cautious, it's timid, which is what you want, because war is serious stuff. War legalizes what in peacetime is first-degree murder, i.e., you can kill somebody who's not threatening your life, and it's still legal to do it. So sometimes you have to do that because there isn't any alternative to your survival. But it's a very, very serious step. And that's why they only wanted Congress to decide whether to vote to go to war. Well, the first time Congress did so was 1812, when James Madison, then president, asked for a declaration of war because there was predation on our maritime commerce, impressing U.S. citizens to go fight in the British Navy. Those of you who want to get a sense of what the British Navy was like, if you read this novel called Billy Budd by Herman Melville, I mean, they were so bad, everyone wanted to flee the British Navy because it was the most horrible experience ever. It's like living in a prison. So instead of upgrading the quality of the British Navy care, they would just kidnap American citizens, and then they would have them fight in the armed forces or in the naval forces of Great Britain. But Congress, over 230 years, they've declared war only 5 times. And in each time, they believed there was an actual invasion of the United States that had already broken the peace, or they were deceived into believing that was the case. So if you look at these 5 occasions, Jeffrey, in each instance, Congress declares that the war has already been initiated by an aggressor, and we are acknowledging that it exists and the president can fight. It never, ever said we are moving from a state of peace to war, but always we've already been put in a place of war because we've been attacked by an aggressor. Now, sometimes they were based on lies, like President Polk lied about American soldier killed on American soil to justify the Mexican-American War. It was lied to by the Congress by President Woodrow Wilson, who denied that the Lusitania was carrying munitions and was a legitimate submarine target in World War I. So he was able to deceive the Congress into declaring war, which probably wouldn't have, absent the lie. We know that President William McKinley insinuated that Spain was responsible for the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor to get a declaration of war against Spain in 1898. But in other instances, there was a legitimate attack at Pearl Harbor, to be sure. And Congress then responded the next day and said, we're already at war with Japan. Now we can go fight them. But that's because it was understood by all the framers, especially Madison and Hamilton both. A state of permanent war, there's no way freedom and liberty can exist. Because in wartime, everything is subordinate to national security. You have no due process. You have no right to privacy. You get conscripted. You have taxes unless you can borrow money. All those things go out the window, and therefore you end up with a police state, a garrison state, rather than a self-governing republic. And that's why war was supposed to be very, very highly disfavored under the Constitution. But when it migrates to the executive branch, which really has happened since at least 1900, the 1898 Spanish-American War, presidents use the military force all the time, hundreds of occasions. Congress only 5. It was George Washington who presided at the Constitutional Convention. When he was president, said, of course, I can never use the armed forces offensively unless Congress has deliberated on it and authorized it. He was at the Constitutional Convention. Everybody understood that. And these things that were very, very clear and understood by the framers went out the window when we decided that we wanted to become an empire, that we decided that God's new chosen people wasn't Moses and Joshua and King David anymore, but it was the United States. And in order to be a chosen people, you have to be endowed with the authority to run around the world and destroy monsters with military force, the projection of military force, because domination and control, rather than the march of the mind and liberty, became the glory of the United States. And with that new philosophical belief of what our destiny was, all the words in the Constitution, get totally tortured and misinterpreted to mean the opposite of what they were intended to mean. And that's where we are today, where even, as you point out, Jeffrey, the United States Supreme Court says a president can do all these things. He's immune from any prosecution, even if he commits war crimes in the White House, like Mr. Trump has done, where he's authorized the killing of persons on boats and vehicles who survived the first attack, because the Supreme Court gets caught up in this empire mentality like everybody else does. And you got to reverse that culture of domination and empire and get back to celebrating the greatest things in the Declaration of Independence was announcing that every human being is endowed with unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the purpose of government is to secure those rights. Purpose of government is not to dominate the world. Purpose of government is not to create big government. Purpose is to let you march to your own drummer, to protect you from aggression, but otherwise you get to decide how you want to use your faculties and develop them. And we all have equal dignity in the eyes of government and under the law. We got to get back to that understanding of why the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence signed their death warrants for this break in history, if you will. Then we can get back to normal constitutional order. Otherwise, I think we're into a long haul. And even if Trump is impeached and removed, if we don't change this philosophical understanding of our destiny as a country, we're going to get Trump 2.0 by a successor. Maybe not so vulgar in the language, but the power is going to be the same in the executive branch.
Yeah, even when you take a look at the national security doctrine strategy they've set out, and I guess it's been referred to as a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. If you could address why James Monroe would not want his name attached to their statement towards South and Latin America, and that they seem to have a complete ignorance on the difference between the Monroe Doctrine and it's not a Trump corollary, it's a Trump repudiation, but trying to get credibility by using Monroe's name, when if Monroe was alive, he'd probably have very strong objections, to it. And it was a doctrine that was helped put together by John Quincy Adams as well. And you've referred to John Quincy Adams, well, who told that we should not look for monsters abroad. I would want to make one other quick point, and I don't want to condone the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, but it must be stated in context that many people believe that the economic blockade we had, trying to deprive Japan of petroleum products while they were fighting in China, was an act of war, could be defined as an act of war as well. So maybe we took the first step. And I said, because we took the first step, I don't want to condone the Japanese for the attack on Pearl Harbor, but there also was a provocation on our part. And the question is if we didn't engage in an act of war against them, an act of war under different means and different methods, then maybe Pearl Harbor never would have been attacked. So,
well, there's another element I'd like to add, Jeffrey, to yours, which is quite accurate. I think we also cutting off their access to iron ore or steel. And that is after World War I armistice, and there was the negotiations for a peace treaty, the Versailles League of Nations. The Japanese proposed that there be an international covenant prohibiting any racial discrimination in laws. Remember, at that time, the United States prohibited anyone of Asian ancestry that was an immigrant from ever becoming a naturalized citizen. If you came from Asia, you could never be naturalized as a citizen. You could come on occasion. Then it would help build the Transcontinental Railroad, but that was it. And it was widespread prohibitions upon Japanese, Chinese from even owning land in places like California. So, and who opposed, who made sure that proposal was voted down? Our President Woodrow Wilson. So we had a whole slew of very discriminatory laws against Japanese and Japanese Americans. So I'm not saying that provoked Pearl Harbor, and I'm certainly not justifying it. Japan at that time was run by military dictatorship, if you will. And they were using violence. There was the rape of Nanking. I'm not defending the Japanese at all. They were attempting to destroy China. The rape of Nanking was terrible. They had their comfort women. But again, it goes to the fact that very few countries have clean hands in any of this. They're all driven by this ulterior motives with very, very unpleasant consequences. And that underscores the need, I believe, given the fact that all countries have these ulterior motives. You got to put as many checks in to the clogs, the arteries of war as you can. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be at war all the time. There's going to be even more suffering. And that was the understanding of James Madison, ambition against ambition. So that's why we ought to basically, even though it's not going to make for a perfect world, be clear that our foreign policy is invincible self-defense, By example, we want to encourage, freedom everywhere. But if other countries decide they don't want to fight for it, that's for them. But otherwise, we're strictly neutral. Not in heart. We can pray and urge countries to go democratic, but we fight only to defend our own. Because once you're involved in military architecture, all liberty and rule of law goes out the window, and you end up imitating the enemy, which is exactly what has happened.
Can you explain to people watching what the intent of the Monroe Doctrine is and why Trump's abuse of it?
Yeah, it's the second abuse. Teddy Roosevelt also abused it, and actually, it's the Trump corollary. Is actually those words, Jeffrey, are used in the November 2025 National Security Strategy paper. It's not something that a journalistic sport. It's in the language. The Monroe Doctrine basically says, and remember, the Monroe Doctrine is 1823. Now, it's important to think of that year because virtually all of Latin America are in revolt against Spanish and Portuguese colonialism. So it's kind of open for the United States to intervene if we wanted to. It really began at least by 1810, but the revolts really didn't end for several decades throughout South America and Central America. And the Monroe Doctrine wasn't a doctrine that said, well, we're going to go into these countries because there's instability and we need to annex them and control them. No, Monroe Doctrine said, no, that there shall be no further European colonization of Central and Latin America. That's it. Not that we were to go into these countries, because we weren't and didn't go in. We did not lift a finger one way or the other for these countries. And it would say no further colonization, which meant the existing colonization at the time, which included Cuba, was left undisturbed, consistent with the Monroe Doctrine, right? And it was a defensive effort, in part because we viewed that these Europeans, and the Napoleonic Wars showed that Napoleon even had an effort, and the British did as well, to cross the Atlantic. Should not be used as a base head, a base that could possibly use to attack the United States. But it was a defensive weapon. It never was used to justify U.S. intervention anywhere in Latin America or Central America. That didn't happen until we ended up with the Roosevelt corollary around early part of 1900. It says, well, any country in Latin America that shows any instability that could jeopardize our economic investments, that are not paying their bonds back that they borrowed from us, justifies our military intervention. That's the Roosevelt corollary. And we used that, Jeffrey. We went in numerous occasions. Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras, Mexico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, over and over and over again, to so-called stabilize these countries so that American investments could prosper. And the Trump corollary goes that now he says we go in there not just to secure our economic investments, but the Trump doctrine is we'll go in and overthrow any country we feel like if we think that they're not going to be friendly to us, period. That's it, for any reason or for no reason whatsoever. And this really is no different than the law of the jungle. And it certainly authorizes a completely lawless globe where anybody who has power goes into any other country, makes up any charge that wants to, say, we're throwing you out because we declare that you're a national security threat. You're a national security danger. Could you imagine that possibility that Mr. Putin right now in Russia saying, yeah, I think I can go in and kidnap Zelensky and just say, oh, we did that because, he's a fascist. He's trying to carry on what Hitler did in World War II. And therefore, we have a justification to do that. Who's going to tell him no? He says he cites the Trump doctrine. You can go anywhere you want. Claim anybody as a national security threat, kidnap them, kill them, prosecute them. Whatever you can get away with becomes legal. And that's going to invite, I think, turbulence that's going to endure for a very, very, very long time. This doctrine is not going to sit around idle. Other countries are going to exploit it. And I also think it's useful to consider something that's an analogy. Analogies are never perfect, but you'll remember that after 9/11, and then Mr. Bush, the president, said, "You're either for us or against us." We had declared war on all terrorists in the globe, in the Milky Way, in the universe. Then all other countries did what? They all labeled their political opponents terrorists and said, all we got to do is call them terrorists. The United States will let us do whatever we want with them. We can commit genocide or whatever, right? So these countries aren't stupid. They understand that, okay, they just cite the United States as an example. And it's always said that the imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And we'll just do exactly what Trump did. So shrug shoulders. How's Trump going to be opposed what he's already said that he's authorized to do on his own? Trump has already indicated he likes dictators anyway. He prefers rule by people who have no votes to people who got some votes. That's why it's kind of ironic that he denounces Maduro as being illegitimate ruler, but even though many of his votes probably were fraudulent, but at least had an election. But he's going to substitute for Maduro a Secretary of State and a Secretary of Defense who haven't attracted one vote in Venezuela, 0 votes. So replacing somebody who got some votes, many fraudulent, with somebody who has no votes, and they're going to rule indefinitely, which it was probably going to be as far as anybody in this program lives. I don't think James Madison's likely to appear in Caracas for 1,000 years. So that's, I think, an important point to remember is that this so-called Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is going to be borrowed and utilized and going to create more wars and more instability than if he hadn't said anything at all.
Isn't it unfortunately too appealing that, as this year is supposedly our 250th anniversary, that we celebrate ourselves as a nation from the Declaration of Independence, that supposedly we're celebrating. I don't know really what we're celebrating, but if you would have asked our first, 5 presidents that were all part of the founding generation, with Monroe being the last one with a direct tie to the founding generation, with Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, they fought against and created a government that was a repudiation of governments throughout the world where might made right. So, and here where reason made right, where consensus is right, and the greatest goal of society is to the pursuit of happiness through the sovereign individual, as you've discussed, so much, exercising their inalienable rights with a sacred promise that the government understood that they're illegitimate if they attempted to even encroach upon those inalienable rights. And so if you think about the idea of civic virtue and republican and the virtue of a republic, that if we look at the Americans today who are celebrating this act because it's a great, maybe a military success, tactically, strategically, we don't know yet, but tactically, you cannot argue that it was not a tactical success. It seemed to be a great tactical success. But people celebrating that, that doesn't reflect such an ignorance of, while we're pretending to celebrate the revolution, we don't seem to have any idea it was a revolution against what? Okay, what were the principles that inspired people to sign, the death warrant when they signed that document? They were signing a direct. They were doing it for a cause. They were doing it for a principle. So how think about the hypocrisy involved in people, whoever is celebrating this act now, and how much of that is that no founder, would ever do something like this, and this is exactly what they wanted to avoid, circumstances like this. And I'll just add one other person that we referred to uh, several times, is General Smedley Butler, uh, and he described as since he was one of the people who fought in a lot of the places you talked about in the beginning of the 20th century. He described himself as a gangster. So and he became so disgusted, that he wrote his book, short book on war is a racket, and he described in some detail, how much of a racket it actually is, and so uh, and then he reminded us of what our founders believed, that the only thing we need to fight for is our home. So we don't let our home be invaded, but unless there's a home invasion, we don't go as John Quincy Adams would, we don't go look for seeking slaying monsters abroad. So we protect our homeland.
Yeah, for sure. And it is a great irony that we're embracing basically the kingship in the 250th anniversary that the Declaration of Independence explicitly repudiates. The idea was in the United States, the rule of law is king. The king is not law. That the idea that the king can do no wrong was complete heresy to the founding generation, including George Washington, the president, right? Um, and so this comes because words in some way in the Constitution have, I say, they become homonyms. That is, they sound alike, but we give them different meanings because we decided we wanted to be an empire that was to be glorious by dominating others, as opposed to a republic that celebrated liberty and the march of the mind. And so we have what I call the homonymic interpretation of the Constitution. Oh, yeah, the word sounds the same as when the framers wrote it, but now it has acquired a new meaning, not by amendment, but just because we put a different gloss on it, because we need to accommodate our demand for an empire. And the fact is, if you're going to run an empire, you have to have a king, you have to have a queen, you got to have unity of command, you got to have secrecy, you've got to have speed, you can't have deliberation, you just fight for the sake of fighting. And so what happened when we decided, hey, let's be empire, then all of the institutions then became warped in order to accommodate that goal of empire and dominate everything. And no longer liberty was thrown out the window, due process thrown out the window, because you just need to go and kill anybody that you happen not to like anymore, because you have to decide, fast. And we didn't need to worry about liberty because we believed that we had become God's chosen people and we could do no wrong. That we had angelic DNA as long as you're white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and those were the ones who enjoyed the rights given by our supreme being, and everyone else was to be a slave or a bootlicker, to the white male dominant culture in the United States. And unfortunately, that is still the culture that we live in today, taken to a higher degree because we've got more ability to live like bullies with our proficiency in killing, our economic and industrial might. And so our behavior is global, our misbehavior is global rather than regional anymore. And we see this every day, and it's a true, it's ingratitude and it's insult to the ambitions of the founding fathers who sacrificed so much, including risking their lives, giving it in many respects, Valley Forge, you name it. And look at what we've done with it. We've squandered it. We've turned back and said, give us back a king. And they would say, wait a minute, look at we sacrificed to get rid of kings, and now you're taking us back. So
Yeah, I'd like to make a suggestion on what I think is the best way, in my opinion, to celebrate our 250th anniversary. And I don't want this to be taken about something just against Trump, because that's not the I want this to happen not as a point against Trump, but a point against anyone who succeeds Trump. Is I think if we really want to regain the spirit of our 250th anniversary from when we declared ourselves independence and as a nation, is there's to me the best way. It's a far superior way than any others to saying that we really understand what we fought for and what we fought against is is that we need to impeach Trump. And the point of impeaching Trump is not just to make Trump the target. The reason why Trump, and that Bruce has made this point a long time, and Bruce has filed articles of impeachment against numerous previous presidents. So 4 or 5, I don't remember how many. So, I mean, I think Bruce and I would have agreed that these articles of impeachment should have been brought sooner, and we wouldn't have Trump doing this if they were brought sooner, because then the president would have known their limits, and the president wouldn't have done anything likely that would have resulted in their impeachment. So to me, the target of the impeachment is not personally against Trump. It is to some extent because he has committed bad acts, and he's committed bad acts that he could legitimately argue some of them are based upon precedents that basically have been accepted, even if they're illegal. But a precedent has been established, and it's time for us to establish a new precedent. And a new precedent is we want to restore a constitutional order, and we want Congress to be more responsible, and we want the systems of checks and balances that prevented tyranny, and maybe what should be on the ballot for 2026 is people who go out and say, I want to restore a constitutional order. I agree with many of the Trump policies, but I don't agree. But the Constitution transcends, policy ideology. And so maybe the way we can celebrate this year is that if this Congress refuses to impeach Trump, that we elect a Congress, even if it's all Republicans. I don't care if it's Republicans or Democrats. The issue is a Congress of people willing to restore the role of Congress to doing what Congress is supposed to do in the system of checks and balances. So again, everyone out there could say, I will vote for every tariff Trump wanted, every war he wanted. I support every war. What I'm against is him taking these decisions unilaterally. That because the Constitution comes first. So again, this is not me being a partisan supporting any sort of political ideology. This is just the fact is the only thing I'm supporting is the Constitution itself. And if we want, if we really want to give relevance to this year of celebration, having it mean something as opposed to meaning nothing, to me, that's the only way that we could give meaning to this 250th anniversary. And again, I want to repeat, this is not meant because a Trump derangement syndrome or nothing. It's because Congress needs to assert itself now. And if this Congress refuses to do so, then we should elect a Congress that says it will do so, and that they'll prove that they'll do so. And they're basically telling not only Trump, but every future president that comes around, independent of whatever party we are, if you cross the line of doing anything that's unconstitutional, okay, we place the Constitution under fidelity to any single individual. So that's my.
If I could just, I'd like to just supplement what you've said, Jeffrey, which I agree with in toto, and that is what I am flirting with and have broached is the idea, again, to try to avoid the argument that this is just anti-Trump, of what I call contingent impeachment. That is, prior to impeachment, the Congress passes a resolution stating that you must, by executive order, renounce these powers that you have usurped, right? And you have 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. You got to renounce those. And the Supreme Court has held that as long as an executive order is intact, even if it could be repealed, it still has to be obeyed as long as it's still valid law. And require Mr. Trump to renounce these usurpations, these violations of the Constitution, declare he does not have that authority whatsoever, to make redress for the harms that have occurred because he did violate the constitutional order. And then he can stay in power. So you avoid getting an argument about Trump or not Trump, Biden, not Biden. Hey, you can stay there. You just have to honor your oath of office. Is it too much to ask a president to honor what he had to do in order to become in the White House? take his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So
Well,
again, because I think both of us, Jeffrey, agree that we do not want this to be an argument over ad hominem attacks, Trump, something else.
well,
This has got to be an argument over the merits of whether we're following the constitutional order. And that's why I call it contingent impeachment and say, listen, you can stay in office. And all we're asking is that you obey your oath. Why is that such a hard task to do? And this is how you can do it. You issue the executive orders on your own, you make redress, and we move on.
yeah, yeah, I think your idea is a significant improvement on mine. I'd phrase it a little bit differently, but we get to exactly the same point. I think it's like you present articles of impeachment and you say you have these articles will be brought against you, but you have 90 days to cure. So we'll give you, like many contracts, if there's a breach, the first thing you do if there's a breach is you give notification and you give an opportunity for what you talked about. Well, the curing and redress.
Yeah.
So I think yes, any fair agreement between parties that if somebody does something wrong, you first let them know you've done something wrong. We want to avoid drastic action. So, maybe it was unintentional. Maybe you've learned your lesson. We're telling you this is wrong, and now we're putting you on notice it's wrong. So you can either, do one or two things and just refuse to acknowledge you're wrong, and then we'll have to take the methods that we need, or you'll acknowledge you're wrong, and we'll pull the impeachment off the table if you cure your constitutional errors and provide adequate redress. So so I think your proposal is certainly an enhancement on my proposal because yes, it gives him the opportunity of curing his defect, of curing his errors, of curing his violations, and providing redress. And and if they do so, I'm not sure whether that will be sufficient to bind future presidents. But it's so that's the trade-off to me. The trade-off to me is, on the one hand, you solve the one problem that now people don't link this to a product of Trump being the target and a unique target, as opposed to just setting a precedent that tells people we gave the executive too much power and we're taking it back. And this is a message not to Trump, but anybody else who will occupy the White House after Trump. So, maybe this will work just as well. But you and I each have the same objective. We want to be fair to Trump, and we want to be fair to anyone who occupies the White House, whoever their name is. I mean, I think that's the point. We don't care about the name of the person in the White House.
Yeah, I think, Jeffrey, I think that although it's not ironclad, it's true executive order can be revoked by a successor. I think if Trump put in these executive orders saying presidents do not have the authority to do, and then have the list of things that he has done in violation of the Constitution. If a new president came in, and as I explained, as long as the executive orders remain outstanding, they're valid, and then started to repeal them, I think that would be a clear warning sign. Wait a minute, this is what got Trump, that Trump had to issue to stay in office, and you're now revoking these executive orders. I think there would be a clear deterrent to revoke the executive orders that Trump had issued, to try to go back to the same old, same old. It's not perfect, but I do think there'd still be an extra barrier. That would be a warning sign, like Mount Vesuvius erupting. Say, wait a minute, anybody who would revoke these orders that we can't trust anymore, we got to do something.
I have a question for you that's obviously very speculative in nature. So, but I think it's something worth considering, and I think it's a plausible scenario, not a probable scenario, but I think it's a plausible scenario. Congress announces its intention to either impeach Trump or after this cure period or not. And what about the possibility of Trump having a cabinet meeting, saying, gee, these members of Congress, they're so pesky, and I'm making America the hottest country in the world. Thinking about how much hotter it would be if we didn't have these nuisances in the Senate, in the House, and think how great this country could really be. Think about how great we in America could be. You know, if I could be elected in 2028, if I was not hounded by these subtleties of this document that's preventing me from doing greatest things in the world. And Hegseth listening to all this, as Secretary of War, and the Trump and the Supreme Court immunity that could basically say he can designate domestic terrorists, and kill anyone deemed a domestic terrorist. That was the principle established during the Obama administration, and it applies all these principles and just starts assassinating people or putting them in jail, sending them to Guantanamo, and intimidating people just to keep him in power. Like, he's behaved like a despot. He's behaved like a tyrant. So if challenged, why would we not expect that maybe rather him responding and being checked by it, one in his personality would think about the fact that this is a guy who says, never say you're sorry, never apologize, never say you're wrong. Okay. He's lived his life. Okay. 80 years of his life, approximately. I don't know exact age, but I guess it's about 80. Of his life living it under that creed. He's not likely, even though I understand, the rationale, and I think it's a reasonable thing, your proposal, but given the fact but doing what you would hope he would do, would be against everything about his life and who he is. So it's not likely he would do it. So he would fight as basically we've got a glimpse from the Smith hearings, that Smith said if he had an opportunity of presenting his case, it would have brought a lot of Republicans, as witnesses that he said would have been compelling witnesses to, the acts of Trump was doing to overturn the election. And the reason why he was looking into phone records was not to look at the calls, as he said, but just basically look at who Trump was calling during that period of time, fighting for, not to certify Biden as president. So, so given the fact that there seems to be, some evidence that Trump was willing to do anything to stay in power, almost anything, and now, what would he do now? Because back then he wasn't sure that he had the immunity he now knows he has. So, I think that scenario is a plausible scenario. Again, I'm not saying it's a probable scenario, but I think it's one that we should not be complacent about, that it would not happen.
No, I agree. I think that there are a couple of points that I think are on the opposite side of the equation, Jeffrey. On the one hand, he has backed down in a couple cases. He has backed down with regard to Chicago and Los Angeles and Portland with the deployment of the National Guard. He backed down on the Epstein files. He went from being opposed to the release. He's actually signed the statute. He does want to stay in power, and that's why he would be risking. He doesn't know this mega crowd is dwindling. It's not a majority by any means, and I think a rational calculation on his part was, if I want to stay in power, I better do this. And he has, and I believe also, Jeffrey, that he has really no principles at all other than narcissism that guides him. So it's not like he feels he's renouncing, like Hitler would have to renounce, his belief that Jews were subhuman, in order to do certain things. And he actually had this, kind of crazy conviction. I don't think that Trump has convictions about anything in the world except he's a narcissist. So it's easier for him to turn and be a human weather vane than for other people, because he doesn't have any investment in any idea ever other than I'm number one and you should pay attention to me. Now, that doesn't mean he couldn't still do what you've described, but I think I would be maybe a little bit less likely than you to think he would have the audacity to do it, although he might. Now, one thing we need to stress, however, Jeffrey, with regard to the immunity issue of the U.S. Supreme Court, it's not immunity from impeachment. It's immunity from getting the court to take action against him. It's not immunity from Congress removing him from office.
Understood. So, given the fact that my philosophy towards, I've made my money through investing my whole life, and as an investor, my approach has always been that I never look at how much money I can make first. I look at all the risks involved. I try and think about all the risks and then make a determination. One, can I live with the risk? Two, then second, if I can determine I can live with the risk, the second thing I make a judgment on is how much do I need to be compensated for. But I try to establish all the things that I think can go wrong, and I want to be prepared for them. I don't want something to happen that I'm unprepared for. Sometimes I'll be prepared for it. And I'll make a bet, and you'll make a wrong bet. Like an example, I can tell you when I first invested, in Parler, in the beginning of 2020, I told the founder, this was in January of 2020. I said, this, I'm going to tell you, I'm investing in Parler because this is my expected evolution. In 2020, we're going to be the platform that continues to support, free speech, as all the other platforms engage in more aggressive content moderation, because they won't want to see Trump win in 2020. They're going to be more aggressive in moderating content. A lot of users will be dissatisfied, and then for all the people who are unhappy that think they're being treated poorly at Twitter and YouTube, will come over and join and join and join Parler, and that Parler should prepare itself for all those people that feel aggrieved on other platforms to be the place of choice. If you agree on the larger platforms, then Parler should be your, the obvious selection. And I also said back in January, right after the election, every major platform is going to deplatform Trump. I said that in January of 2020, and that Parler needed to be prepared that Trump, after the election of 2020, win or lose, was going to probably be deplatformed everywhere. Okay, and and uh, and that if Parler became the dominant platform, alternative platform to the mainstream platforms, uh, then basically then Parler would be the choice, and Parler would grow a lot. So I said basically Parler had to have the infrastructure, to be prepared, to handle Trump when this happens. That was my investment thesis going in. And what did I say could go wrong? What I said could go wrong at the same time is that we got to assume the day Trump joins Parler, okay, Parler will be canceled by Apple, Parler will be canceled by Google, and Parler will be canceled by everyone that supports it. So we need to spend all of 2020 building an whole entire ecosystem, that was anti-fragile with respect to the tech that could censor Parler's existence. So these are all things I thought about before the investing. Unfortunately, unfortunately, all this was ignored by the people who controlled governance rights. Since I had no governance rights, you know, uh, my advice was welcome in a lot of matters, but the key issues of being prepared for Trump joining Parler, Parler becoming over $1 billion platform, and being prepared when Apple and Google, booted it, and Amazon booted it. I anticipated all that precisely because of this. I don't like to take anything for granted. It doesn't mean you think things will happen, but it means that they might happen, and you got to have preparation for them. And unfortunately, people become too complacent, and that's one of the things. That's why people are prone to make mistakes. Even if you're not complacent, you'll still make mistakes. But becoming complacent, you'll make more mistakes than somebody who tries to think about all the things can go wrong and is prepared for them, to the greatest extent possible. And it doesn't mean that you don't take risk. It means you understand the risk you're taking, you understand the risk you're willing to take, and then you understand the compensation you need in order to take that risk. So it's just the orientation of how I think about everything is from that perspective. I like to think through all the things that go, all plausible, scenarios, all possible scenarios, even if they're not probable scenarios, even if they're not likely scenarios.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't want to treat these as black swans that have no predictable attributes to them. No, I think a lot of things, if people spend time thinking about and studying things to understand where are the things that can go wrong, and then just plan accordingly and mitigate them. It shouldn't give you fear. It should give you knowledge and wisdom to just be better at making decisions.
Yeah. Well, what I would say, Jeffrey, and I need to move on here, to all our audience. This is, and I think both of us together, we're over 100 years of, in the quarters of power. This really is reached a point where we can't afford summer soldiers and sunshine patriots in defense of the Constitution. You got to take risks out there. Our ancestors took risks far greater than what we're being asked to. But this is just beyond the pale what has been done by Mr. Trump. And again, as we discussed, it's not getting rid of Mr. Trump. If he complies with the Constitution and does redress, he can stay. This is not retributive. It's not punitive. It's remedial. But if not us, who? If not now, when? This is the time to draw the line. Even if it doesn't happen tomorrow, we want your voice to be heard, especially in the eyes of Congress. Write your members of Congress, write your letters to the editor. This is just beyond any possible constitutional justification. And whatever happens, happens. At least we know if the Constitution goes down in flames, we were the firefighter. We weren't the fire.
So, well, thank you, Bruce, for this special edition. And again, we wish everybody a wonderful, successful 2026, and let's make the 250th anniversary a something very special legacy that we leave for our loved ones, our offspring, and for future generations. Let's not just think about ourselves. Let's think about our future generations. Um, uh, Bruce, any other final comment from you?
No, I'm I'm working there 24 hours a day to try to, again, this is not about bitterness. It's not ad hominem attack. The system is far superior to any individual here. If we don't hang together on process, we're all going to hang separately. Kind of keep understanding that this is not the good guys and the bad guys. Hey, we're all have flaws, and we're not infallible. You can raise questions, but hey, let's always, use our critical thinking and appeal to the better angels of our nature as we go forward.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Jeffrey. Appreciate it.
Bye.